Pfizer on USA Today, Pfizer on CNBC, the rise of BioNTech, 90 billion% effective, giving them to the kids, giving them to the dogs, the cats. It's everywhere in our lives now. Prior to the last 2 years, the only time you heard about Pfizer was if it was about the magic blue pill, or if it was about a new pharmaceutical scandal all over the news. But now Pfizer is being positioned as the leader of the pharmaceutical industrial complex. Well, to provide a bit of a context for what we're gonna get into today in this juicy video, I have a really quick clip for y'all. But before we begin, please subscribe, like, and comment. It'll only take you a second and means so much to us. Let's get into this clip.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Well, I think you guys are starting to get the picture here. Do I need to play that again? Nah. Originally found the clip on a forum and noticed later on that Joe Rogan, our podcasting comedian superstar hero, had shared it with the caption, "Clown emoji, world emoji." And almost like it was meant to be, the top comment, "Why doesn't anyone ever talk about Pfizer's losses or fraud on those shows?" Well, we're gonna talk about that on Houston Ensemble because somebody has to. And don't forget to watch our 5 best clips for Dr. Sanjay Gupta on Joe Rogan Experience. We've had a good response on this video already, and it really makes it super clear the amount of corruption going on. If it wasn't clear already, I have a really important image infographic here. And I want to draw your attention to the first one and the third one right here. We got Scott Gottlieb at the top. You can see him on your left with the FDA as the former FDA commissioner in charge of regulating Pfizer. And the third one down here, we got James C. Smith, CEO of Reuters, in charge of informing people about the pokey things. Now look what happens here. Scott, or his doppelganger, is now seen in Pfizer as one of the members of the board of directors. And same for James C. Smith. He appears in an alternate universe as a current member of the board of directors of Pfizer. You know, in some planets, this might be called a conflict of interest. And I know what you guys thinking, Armin, just get to it. Well, you're really gonna want to stick around for number 1 here. But let's start with 3. A tiny case in comparison to number 2. Number 3 is the first groundbreaking case, the biggest of its kind at the time, way back in 2004. And we see the headline here out of the New York Times: Pfizer to pay $430 million over promoting drug to doctors. And the drug in question here was Neurontin, also called gabapentin. Originally, Neurontin gabapentin is used for the management of post-herpetic neuralgia in adults, adjunctive therapy in the treatment of partial seizures with and without secondary generalization in patients over 12 years of age with epilepsy, adjunctive therapy in treatment of partial seizures in pediatric patients 3 to 12, and also useful for the treatment of chronic neuropathic pain. Where they got messed up is when Pfizer was pushing this medication for the use in various neurological disorders, including, but not limited to, bipolarism or schizophrenia or chronic depression. I want to just read a historical snapshot of this document because I can't afford the really amazing current journalistic efforts at New York Times. So, Pfizer, the world's largest pharmaceutical company, pleaded guilty yesterday and agreed to pay $430 million to resolve criminal and civil charges that it paid doctors to prescribe its epilepsy drug, Neurontin, to patients with ailments that the drug was not federally approved to treat. Of that settlement, $26.6 million will go to a former company advisor who brought a lawsuit under a federal whistleblower law. Speaking of whistleblowers, a lot of them coming out in recent months. So why is this important? Well, what you won't find very easily is the sheer amount of cases suppressed by Pfizer and payouts to families whose members have died simply from adverse reactions or just the abuse of the drug, which is highly addictive and often resulted in suicide by overdose. And if you dig deeper into the lawsuits, you'll see a laundry list of other related lawsuits that are difficult to find because, frankly, they've been scrubbed and suppressed. But why is this important? In recent years, a litany of scientific research has been released regarding the harmful effects of gabapentin. And now, we have the full FDA phase 4 clinical study information of more than 96,000 people who have reported side effects when taking Neurontin from the FDA. And this list is updated regularly. You can check it out for yourself. But this case pales in comparison to our number 2. Number 2, the biggest settlement in pharmaceutical company history. Again, our lovely friends at Pfizer. Justice Department announces largest healthcare fraud settlement in history. This is from September 2nd, 2009. American pharmaceutical giant Pfizer and its subsidiary Pharmacia and Upjohn Company Incorporated, hereinafter together Pfizer, have agreed to pay $2.3 billion, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the Department of Justice, to resolve criminal and civil liability arising from the illegal promotion of certain pharmaceutical products. Starting to get the picture of how Pfizer makes their monies here. Pharmacia and Upjohn Company has agreed to plead guilty to a felony violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for misbranding Bextra with the intent to defraud or mislead. Bextra is an anti-inflammatory drug that Pfizer pulled from the market in 2005. Under the provisions of the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, a company must specify the intended uses of a product in its new drug application to FDA. Once approved, the company may not be marketed or promoted for so-called off-label use, i.e. any not specified in an application approved by FDA. Pfizer promoted the sale of Bextra for several uses and dosages that the FDA specifically declined to approve due to safety concerns. The company will pay a criminal fine of $1.195 billion, the largest criminal fine ever imposed in the United States for any matter. Wow. Pharmacia and Upjohn will also forfeit $105 million for a total criminal resolution of $1.3 billion. It goes on and on for the off-branding use of antipsychotics. A good article by our friends at CBS actually has a nice list of other details about the case. Speaking of which, we had award-winning CBS news anchor Art Rascon on our podcast that I highly recommend you guys watch if you want an inside scoop about what's going on in the media today. In addition to the fines, 6 whistleblowers will receive more than $102 million in recovery. This case alone impacted more than 10,000 postal employees on workers' compensation who were treated with the drugs. Whose brand name will be tarnished by the company pleading guilty to a crime? not Pfizer's. Rather, it's Pharmacy and Upjohn Company, which will cop to felony violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for misbranding Bextra with the intent to defraud or mislead. In what must be the dumbest act of off-label drug promotion ever, Pfizer once put out a press release touting Bextra as an effective morphine-sparing analgesic after knee surgery. Bextra was not approved for post-surgery pain, and it goes on and on and on. And this was back when journalists, even in the mainstream, had the balls to tell you what these people were doing. So this really shouldn't be taken lightly. And another archived article from the New York Times, Pfizer said Friday it had agreed to settle $894 million. Virtually all the losses related to its withdrawn painkiller Bextra, as well as a similar drug that remains in the market, Celebrex, 4 years after concerns about cardiovascular risks, which you're hearing a lot about today. Interesting how it all repeats over and over. The announcement comes approximately 1 year after Merck announced a $4.85 billion reserve to settle litigation involving the similar painkiller Vioxx, which Merck pulled off the market in September 2004. Pfizer withdrew Bextra 7 months later, but left Celebrex on the market, contending that it was less dangerous. Well, how nice of them. It doesn't stop with these people. And the reason you don't hear about it is because they pay families off. They pay institutions off. This information is difficult to find, but if you dig, you will find it. And it's really not surprising. Up until recently, pharmaceutical companies have never been trusted with even babysitting your dog, much less telling you what to put in your body to live a healthy life. And you can go on classaction.org to find a list of all the lawsuits pertaining to heart attacks, the really severe Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is extremely debilitating. Even our fact checkers at USA Today can't deny and must label this information as partly false. Well, how nice of them. It's like, yeah, the sky is blue, but that's only partly true. Yeah, you get wet when you swim, but that's only partly true. So the moment you've all been waiting for, the first and biggest fraud, this is the one that really takes the cake. But before we get into it, I want to show you guys this clip of our friend Don Lemon, probably really good friends with his buddies at Pfizer, doubling down on his defamation against our buddy Joe Rogan. Let's check this out.
It was in large part a tongue-in-cheek interview, because it's Joe Rogan and there's lots of you're jockeying back and forth. But he did say something about ivermectin that I think wasn't actually correct about CNN and lying. Okay, ivermectin is a drug that is commonly used as a horse dewormer. So it is not a lie to say that the drug is used as a horse dewormer. I think that's important, and it is not approved for COVID. Correct?
That's right. That's correct. It is not approved for COVID, and you're right. I mean, the FDA even put out a statement saying, basically reminding people, it was a strange sort of message from the FDA, but they said, you're not a horse, you're not a...
Sort of a strange message from the FDA. Yeah, probably because it's already been administered to like 3 to 4 billion people for antiviral use over the past 4 to 5 decades. Yeah, it is kind of a weird thing when they start saying, yeah, Advil's not for headaches and pain relief. What are you talking about? You can't use antibacterials in humans. That's only for cows.
Cow, stop taking this stuff, is essentially what they said, referring to ivermectin. Now, I think what Joe's point
that
is...
It has been approved for humans, but not necessarily for COVID, right? Yeah.
That's correct. It's been used for a parasitic disease, for something it's called river blindness, and it's been very effective for that. But just because it works for one thing doesn't mean it works for something else. And there's still a few ongoing clinical trials around ivermectin, but for the most part, if you look at the data, there's no evidence that it really works here. When Joe got sick, he took ivermectin. He also took monoclonal antibodies, which is, an infusion of these antibodies. So he took both those things. It's very likely it was the monoclonal antibodies that made him feel better so quickly.
So it's all semantics. He took that, it was probably that. Oh yeah, it's been used, but there's no evidence. You go on PubMed or you go on just the NIH website and there's a litany of trial data on this drug. Why do they keep doing this? It's because money's at stake here.
When Don Lemon goes on with Sanjay Gupta and says, actually, it really is a veterinary medicine. It really
no,
is.
No, but that's not what this was the lie. He goes, it's not a lie to say it's also used as horse medicine. He goes,
that's not what you said.
Yeah, that's not what you said. You didn't say this drug, which also is used for horses. Of what relevance is that?
It doesn't have any relevance. Exactly what you're talking about with penicillin and with a gigantic number of medicines that also have veterinary applications. But by doing that, you just prove my point. They don't even understand what they just did. You think no one's like it's going to end with you? See, because it used to be that way. They would say something and no one would have recourse.
Do you know what this is?
But when you're saying something and then the person you're saying it about has literally 10 times the audience you do, you dumb motherfucker. Do you know what you did? You just proved my point.
I hope that Joe does take him to court. And I hope that people really stop and think for themselves, because you shouldn't think that you are not smart enough to do a basic amount of thinking. You've spent, 2 decades in school to do critical thinking? Don't allow somebody to gaslight you to thinking up is down, right is left, good is bad, and pink is green. At last, number 1 on our list. I have to be really careful with this part because this is the part that can trigger our friends at YouTube. I want to read to you one version of the alleged approval letter that we got. On August 23, 2021, having concluded that revising this EUA is appropriate to protect the public health or safety under Section 464, is reissuing the August 12, 2021 letter of authorization in its entirety with revisions incorporated to clarify that EUA will remain in place for Pfizer BioNTech POKI for the previously authorized indication and uses, and to authorize use of Comirnaty under the EUA for certain uses that are not included in the approved biologics application. In addition, the fact sheet for healthcare providers administering the POKI was revised to provide updates on expiration dating, blah, blah, blah. I want you to really think about what was just stated in this approval letter. They extended the EUA. Do you understand? On page 7 of this other updated version, to Amit Patel, it reads that you may label your product with the proprietary name Comirnaty. What is that? On page 6 of this contract letter, talks about required pediatric assessments, required studies that are contingent upon the so-called approval of this new label version of the POKI. And it states here, Study C4591009 titled A Non-Interventional Post-Approval Safety Study of the Pfizer BioNTech POKI in the United States to evaluate the occurrence of myocarditis and pericarditis following administration of Comirnaty. Well, how interesting. They admit that we got to study heart issues. And when are they expecting this study to be completed? The final report submission here is October 31, 2025. The approval is contingent upon these studies, and yet their effective completion is not until 2025. How's this possible? And why mention of Comirnaty? What is Comirnaty? Why the extension of the EUA? If this is approval, where are the words, this is approved? Or is this a misdirection? Is this a hocus pocus, double speak, legalese jargon? If you don't believe me, maybe ask a lawyer. This is not advice. This is just Houston Ensemble doing their best to understand this confusing world. And it gets worse, because if you read the contracts between governments, Pfizer has nations by the balls. In this section of the contract between Albania and Pfizer, leaked by investigative reporters at GoGo, in indemnification, it reads, purchaser hereby agrees to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless Pfizer, BioNTech, each of their affiliates, contractors, subcontractors, licensors, licensees, sub-licensees, distributors, contract manufacturers, service providers, clinical trial researchers. Remember those studies that they were doing? That isn't going to be completed for another 3-4 years. They've already prepared an indemnification clause in the instance in which it is proved that the pokies have severe adverse effects. And to make matters worse, they even admit under section 5.5 of the contract that purchaser further acknowledges that the long-term effects and efficacy of the pokey are not currently known, and there may be adverse effects of the pokey that are not currently known. Furthermore, to the extent applicable, purchaser acknowledges that the product shall not be serialized. Guys, we have a situation in which a company and approved agencies are working in tandem to create illusory legal parameters for the selling and procurement of massive government contracts all over the world. Nothing is approved. The emergency authorizations are extended, studies are not completed, and liabilities are waived. In a note by the Ministry of Health from the Brazilian government, it states not only the frustration that the company Pfizer would cause to Brazilians, but the unfair and abusive clauses that were established by the laboratory create a barrier to negotiation and purchase. As an example, we quote 5 excerpts from the pre-contract clauses, which have already been widely publicized by the press. Number 1, Brazil renounces the sovereignty of its assets abroad for the benefit of Pfizer as a guarantee of payment, as well as establishing a guarantee fund with amounts deposited in an account abroad. Wow. That's laundering. 2, the removal of Brazilian jurisdiction and laws with the institution of an arbitration agreement under the laws of New York in the United States, which I can confirm to you in the contracts themselves here in a second. 3, that the first and second batches of the pokies have 500,000 doses and the third 1 million, totaling 2 million in the first quarter with the possibility of delay in delivery, which is also something that they do not cover. I'll also show that in the contracts. That if there is a delay in delivery, there is no penalty, and that a liability waiver be signed for any possible side effects of the pokies, exempting Pfizer from any civil liability for serious side effects, which I just read you. We might be witnessing in real time a massive case of fraud that will probably dwarf the 2.3 billion settlement, and it will span dozens of countries around the globe. This is why it's so critical, ladies and gentlemen, that we scrutinize and we trust in ourselves to do the research necessary and understand what we're doing to ourselves and our countries. If we're gonna do the research when we're buying a t-shirt from Amazon to know all about its fit and its material and how comfortable it is, why not do the same work when it comes to putting something into ourselves? Why not do the same work when it comes to a product that is supposed to help save human life? To put a bow tie on this massive case of fraud really unveiling before us in real time, there's actually a great report, a couple of great reports by our friends at Wyon. So let's check out this really quick clip here.
While countries like India are sending free vaccines to poorer nations, there are companies like Pfizer which are bullying governments. Pfizer asked to be compensated for the cost of any future lawsuits. Pfizer wanted Argentina to put, and listen to this, put its bank reserves, its military bases, and its embassy buildings at stake as collateral. These are Pfizer's demands. Look at this. Number one, Brazil waives the sovereignty of its assets abroad in favor of Pfizer. That the rules of the land be not applied on Pfizer. Number three, that Brazil take into consideration a delay in delivery. Number four, that Pfizer is not penalized for it, for a delay in delivery. And number five, in case of any side effects, Pfizer be exempted from all civil liability. 8 months have passed since we reported this. Pfizer has not changed. It is still putting profits above public health. It is still forcing governments to bend to its will. An advocacy group has thrown up more details of what Pfizer does. It has accessed some confidential contracts of Pfizer. And we have a copy. These contracts are with 9 countries and blocks, and the details are shocking. Desperate countries are being forced to make humiliating concessions to Pfizer. We went through the entire report. We found 6 very important points worth highlighting. Number one, Pfizer has the right to silence governments. It has forced countries to not talk about the deals they strike for shots. Number two, Pfizer controls the donations of its shots, not the country that buys them. Pfizer will decide where the shots go. Number three, Pfizer has secured an intellectual property waiver for itself, and this clause is particularly disturbing. If Pfizer is accused of intellectual property theft, governments will pay, not the company. Number four, if there are disputes, private arbitrators and not public courts will decide on them. Number five, Pfizer can go after state assets to secure its compensation. And number six, Pfizer calls the shots on all key decisions. It decides delivery timelines and more.
When this pyramid crumbles, it's going to be the most massive awakening moment in our lives. In regards to our friendly fact checkers, always remember, we're gonna do a different video on these people in a different time. But for now, understand, our fact check work is supported in part by a grant from Facebook. And understand that all of these numbers are public data. When it comes to income, funding sources, some of them are tricky to find, but it's all out there. And the amount of implications by simply knowing where money is going is massive. But not only that, guys, if you just look at the author of, say, just this article right here, Resolved Lawsuits Against Pfizer. Well, who's the author? Adrian Dunn. I found Adrian's LinkedIn. He has, let's look at his education. He has a bachelor's in journalism from Arizona State. Cool. Why is he doing a fact check about a legal proceeding? And if he has the authority or the expertise to do that with his bachelor's degree, can I do that with my master's degree? Is that okay? Do I have enough brains here? Do you have enough brains to understand what's going on? Or what about this Snopes fact check about the new Pfizer drug, the pill for the treatment of this new thing going around? Does that have maybe something to do with its demonization of the other horse dewormer thing we're talking about? They say here, yeah, they're both protease inhibitors, but just because they're both protease inhibitors doesn't mean that there's any conflict here. Doesn't mean that they're developing a similar drug to the dewormer. These people will hold a piece of paper that's red and insist that it's blue. I know that I use that analogy a lot, but it's important to understand how sociological, psychological abuse is done on the people by way of gaslighting. If you simply repeat the lie over and over again, the hope is that eventually it'll sound like the truth. But if you keep your finger on the barometer of truth, you'll never ever be fooled into thinking that lies are actually facts. If we go down to Mr. Dan Evan here, Dan Evan, the author of that fact check, is a Chicago-based writer who has been sifting through the sludge of social media since 2009. Prior to joining the editorial staff at Snopes, he was the editor-in-chief in Social News Daily, a senior writer for The Inquisitor, and covered motorcycle racing for All About Bikes magazine. No mention of his credentials or his expertise. These randos are now the masters of what you consume as fact or fiction. What's better, trusting these randos or trusting your God-given intellect? I'll let you decide. This has been a quick report by Houston Ensemble. I'm Armov. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It'll only take you a second, but it means so much to us. And with that, I'll see you guys on the next video.